Thank you all for joining us. My name is Erasma Veras Monticholo, and I am your host for Powering Up with Power of Two Facebook Live series, in which we engage with community leaders, residents, and advocates to talk about pressing issues facing families and children in New York City, and the steps that we can each take as individuals and as a collective to ensure the health and well-being of our communities. At Power of Two, we partner with families to help them heal from trauma, promote healthier interpersonal interactions between young children and their parents, their extended families, and other caregivers. We approach our work by countering the narrative of individualism and instead focusing on the we. By reclaiming the collective we also reclaim community. This is how we begin our healing. Healing is a journey that we embark on to connect our rich history and into our culture, our present and our future. Our guest today, Naima Oyo, is very familiar with the concept of reclaiming community and our power. Naima is the executive director of Ifetayo, an arts and cultural organization based here in Brooklyn that is dedicated to uplifting communities by supporting the creative, educational, and professional development of children and families of African descent. Naima is committed to supporting our young children to develop a strong African-centered cultural identity so that they can understand and harness their own power. Naima is a proud Brooklyn native, and she brings compassion and a commitment to community-led social transformation to the Ifetayo movement. I am thrilled to have Naima here with us today. Naima, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation.
Wonderful. So I would like to start us off by asking, what is your personal connection to the work that you do with Ifetayo?
You know, I've been thinking a lot about how I wound up here in this moment and why I am doing this work. And I realized that I have a certain set of privileges, and I think that we all have a different set of privileges, right? And my privileges don't necessarily look like your privileges or Trump's privileges or Bill Gates' privileges or my neighbor's privileges. But one of my privileges is that I was raised from a very early age to know that I was an African, and that before anything, I was an African. And I know that that has been a big part of my trajectory through life.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Naima. That is incredibly powerful. You know, it resonates with me personally because I came to the United States as a 7-year-old from the Dominican Republic, and we were one of 2 Spanish-speaking families in Brownsville. And I remember that the other family was, you know, of Puerto Rican descent. And so everyone in the community assumed, oh, you're Puerto Rican too. And I remember talking with my parents about that, and they were like, no, you need to own your Dominicanness. You need to own, you know, your crazy curls. And so, yeah, that's right. And so this is my crown, and this is how I wear it. And, you know, and so I've developed a sense of pride in who I am. So I appreciate you sharing that. So we have some commonality in that.
And I guess I want to be clear, because so many people don't use the term African. Or when you say African, they think that, oh, her parents must have immigrated here or migrated here. But both my parents on my mother's side and my father's side are descendants of those Africans who were dropped off on this landmass during the transatlantic slave trade, right?
Mm-hmm.
My mother's family is from North Carolina. My grandmother was born in Maryland. My father's family is also from the South, but came north much earlier and wound up in the Northeast Delaware area. And so it's not that 2 generations ago or 3 generations ago, my my ancestors were in Ghana or Nigeria or any of those places, right? I'm an African by descent, right? Because it's in my DNA. It is genetically, spiritually, and physically who I am.
I love that. I love the way you say that with such power. It gives me chills because, you know, it's so important to own that, to feel it. And when you said it, I just felt it. I could smell it, I could hear it, I could just feel it from the ends of my head all the way to my toes. So thank you for that. I want to ask you a question about, you know, a little bit about trauma. So in a Western context, we tend to think of trauma as something that people experience on a granular or individual level. However, when we know that trauma can and does exist within whole communities in instances of shared historical experiences, right? When we think about slavery, how does the historical trauma impact people of African descent?
You know, we've been talking a lot about trauma at Ifetayo, specifically over the past, I would say, 8 months or so in the midst of COVID and in the midst of this ongoing trauma of existing as an African in America and even existing as an African in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been talking a lot about it and what it means to our community. And we do have a shared trauma. And it is the shared trauma Sorry, I think I dropped off.
No worries, no worries. We were trying to figure out, you know, it's 2020. It's 2020. That's all. That's all. We're gonna leave it at that.
So it's that trauma of almost being ripped from the womb, if you can imagine, being ripped from the womb and now having to figure things out, and ongoing intergenerational trauma. And I think one of the biggest pieces of that is self-hate, right? That we have been taught at one point pretty intentionally, right? Pretty specifically, that there was something wrong with being an African person, or something wrong with being Black, or something wrong with us, right? It was a specific intentional communication. And I think somewhere over these 400 years that the message hasn't changed, but it's not as blatant, although under this past administration, or this administration that we're coming out of, it has been a bit more blatant. But that trauma of being told over and over and over again that there's something wrong with you and you're no good, right? And it didn't start with Naima. It didn't start with Naima's mother. It didn't start with Naima's grandmother. It started generations back. And because that trauma, for the most part, have not been resolved, we have not dealt with it, we are continuing to act out. We're continuing to act out. And we act out in how we treat ourselves. We act out in how we treat our children. We act out in how we treat our neighbors. We act out in how we treat our elders. We act out because the love, specifically the self-love, is missing. We have been taught that it's not okay to love yourself. And so we're trying to undo that. We're trying to undo that trauma.
That's right. And, you know, it's interesting because we see that, you know, obviously as part of our work every day. And, you know, our work is really tailored to celebrate what families are doing well, what parents are doing well. And so when we come in, their expectation is that we're going to, be very prescriptive about, you didn't do this right, you didn't hold your baby, you didn't respond, you didn't do this, you don't have enough food in the refrigerator. And we go in there and we say, wow, you're doing an incredible job. Like, congratulations. Look at what you've accomplished. And they're like, wait a minute, what? I've never, that what we get is, are you on something? Because we don't hear that, right? So our mothers, our children don't hear that. And so the reason why our programming works is because we're focusing on that. We're harnessing their confidence. We're tapping into their innate ability to care for their children the way we had been taught thousands of years ago, because our history doesn't start 401 years ago, right? If we think about our African diaspora, like we have a civilization that we came from, right, that was quite advanced. And so really helping our families tap into that and build their pride and think about, what decolonization really looks like. And it's exactly that. It's tapping into your self-love, your love of your community, your love of your children, and really thinking about how do you continue to support that and amplify that.
Yeah. And I think that when you can love yourself, you can forgive yourself, as a parent, as a child, as a person. I can forgive myself. I'm not perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. And it's okay. It's okay. And the approach is an asset-based approach versus a deficit.
That is exactly it. That's right. Exactly. If you love yourself, then you can forgive yourself, right? And you begin to recognize, and I talk about this all the time, that you begin to recognize that you're making decisions based on the options available to you, right? And if you had more options, maybe your decisions and your choices would be different. So really centering that for families. I have another question for you. How do you think we can affirm greatness while dealing with trauma?
I think, and I don't want to sound like I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but I think that it starts with love and forgiveness, right? And truth. That is a big part of it, is the truth. And when you don't know the truth, or you've been fed these stories that are not true, it's hard to love yourself. It's hard to forgive, right? And so I think that one of my battles, one of my battle cries is that, and you alluded to it, our history did not start 400 years ago, right? And, I'm a child of, you said I'm born and raised in Brooklyn. I'm a product of New York City public schools on some level. And then on the other hand, I'm a product of my parents and my community. And in school, you're learning that pretty much your history started with the slave trade, right? Not even the slave trade, that, your people were brought here as slaves. Lincoln freed them. Then Malcolm made a speech with the civil rights, and now we're here. Although I think probably now somewhere along the way we had our first Black president, right? So that's our narrative, right? So that's the narrative that's reinforced, and you can't start there. If you tell your child, or if everything they're hearing about who they are and how they got here is because their ancestors were slaves, or they were slaves, they don't have the space or capacity at that age to really do the analytical examination of the why and the how. And so I believe, and Eva Tyler, we believe, that it then puts them in a position of shame, right? And they are ashamed. And so when they're doing the school projects around ancestry or history or migration or the history of America, their position is one of shame. And what is there to be proud of? What is there to be proud of? Yeah, your great-great-grandfather was a slave. What is there to be proud of? And that is what is being reinforced. And so there's two things that need to change. One is that your grandfather was not a slave, he was a stolen African, and really being intentional with our words and how we use them. He was not a slave, he was a stolen African. That simple change in words begins to change the story. Mm-hmm. The second piece is that this stolen African was able to survive and move to thriving to the point where we are today. And you can still add in all those other pieces of Lincoln and Malcolm and Martin and all, and Ida B. Wells and everyone, who kind of came along the way, that for Naima to be sitting here or Erasma to be sitting there, or Kofi or David, whoever, to be sitting in that seat. What it really took for this stolen African who was ripped with extreme trauma, ripped away. And now for us to be standing here, what it took. And so that's one piece where you can begin to find the pride and the greatness and the resilience and the innovation and the capacity and the imagination to figure out how to survive given that dynamic. Mm-hmm. So that's one. But the second one, the second one is that's if you want to start 400 years ago, right? Our history goes back so further. It goes back so much further. And so if you start teaching our children and the other children, because it's not just us as a part of this dynamic, it's this society that we're all existed in, that there is a greatness that comes with being an African. There is a greatness that comes with being the descendant of those Africans who were able to survive and move to thriving with all these obstacles that were put in their way, that somehow we are still here and we are doing amazing activities, contributions, inventions, through it all.
That's right.
Like, look at it in that context. And it's hard to have that conversation with the 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old, but that's really when it needs to start. That you're an African and you're amazing. You're amazing and you're an African.
And that there's pride and joy in that.
There's pride and joy and love.
And love.
And you are amazing.
That's right. And a richness.
And the abilities are unlimited.
That's right. So, I mean, if, and my children and I, we talk about this all the time, but if we stop to think about it, and they think I sound like a broken record. Our history goes well beyond 401 years ago. Okay, Mama, let's talk about that. I'm like, well, think about, the music. Mm-hmm. Think about, the art. Not only if you go, to Africa, and by the way, Africa is huge, and there's so many different countries, right? But you think about all of the things that have been accomplished, right? And think about all the contributions that we've made here in a land that wasn't ours. There's greatness in all of that, and there's power and there's pride. And so you should walk around with your chin up and your head up and your shoulders back, because you have contributed in more ways than you can possibly imagine. And it's my job and the job of our educational system to show you how. Right. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about and ask you about is, how can we push for integration of art and cultural education into the curriculum in New York City, right? How can we advocate for more of that, and not just, as you said, not just talking about, Martin Luther King and celebrating Black History Month, but that it's part of the curriculum that all students, not just ours, but that all students have access to.
Yeah. I think it's a really, really tough nut to crack. one, and I have a visceral reaction to the word integration. I'm sure for all the reasons that you know.
I know.
But even just the starting point of integrating it is kind of you're starting here and then figuring out how to sprinkle these other things in. And it needs to exist before that. It needs to be included. It needs to be a part of this. It needs to be at the starting point of the curriculum. And I don't really have the answer on how do you undo or restart the curriculum, although they do it every so often when I hear about new curriculums and new maths and things like that are being taught it. So people with much bigger brains than I can figure it out. But the starting point has to be a new starting point, right? That it's not being integrated. It is at the foundation. It's at the starting point. And so I think that we as parents, we as voters, we as taxpayers, we as people who may have gone to college and got a little bit of education, we who have not gone to college and got a little bit of education, maybe we figured it out on our own. We need to use our voices, and we need to, at the very local level, push local government, our local elected officials. We need to be involved in the schools, attending PTA meetings. We need to participate. And I know I am keenly aware of the luxury, right, of me saying that we need to participate, right? We need to find the time to participate because it's important. Because we're coming from very traumatic environments that impact our ability to find time to go to a PTA meeting that's happening when you may be at work or may not be at work or need childcare. So all the dynamics that kind of are around that. But I say that those who can must and have to. We have to use our collective voices to say it's not okay. We have to. I think it's in our collective voice. That's really the only way forward. And when I say our collective voice, it cannot just be Black and brown people. It has to be everybody. And I think that everything that's going on right now, this movement, this idea that Black Lives Matter and Black lives are important, and the state of our world and our country is not okay. It has to be consistent and not just a flavor of the month or a flavor of the year, right? That it has to be consistent.
That's right. So there has to be a commitment, right? So now that we're in this reckoning of sorts, right? Where there's a movement for awakening. It's not a fad. Now that we have you here, now that you're paying attention, now that you're aware, partner with us, be allies with us in this effort to really make sure that, as you say, Naima, that all of this is part, right, of our education system that everybody should have access to. And someone from Facebook asked a question related to this, which is, how do we make the public school system tell the story Naima is presenting, the facts, right? So no sugarcoating, right? But the reality that we, in fact, were stolen Africans, right? How do we get the school system to tell the truth, right? But I think you're answering that and saying it's a collective effort. It's a consistent effort, and it's going to require real allyship, right, to make it happen.
And I'll say something else is that we cannot wait for the public school system to do it. We cannot wait for this country to do it. We have to do, if it's not happening in the public schools, it has to happen at home. I don't want this on into commercial, but organizations like Ifatayo, right? Organizations like Power of Two, organizations like Asaseya, organizations like the Caribbean Culture Center, right? There are organizations that are talking about our history and our culture in an exciting and dynamic and engaging way.
Mm.
And so if you're not getting it at the schools, as you're pushing the schools, as you're voting, as you're joining PTAs, as you're having conversations with your student's teacher, right? There has to be a parallel piece that's happening at home.
That's right.
Or what they call it, out of school time, right? We have to reinforce our children's self-esteem and teach them their history. When I got to first or second grade, like I knew who I was. Mm-hmm. And whatever the teacher said, like I used to get letters written home. But my parents was Naima. You want Naima?
I feel like we were living parallel lives, Naima.
Yeah, like have a conversation with her, right? We have Thanksgiving is coming up next week, and you know we didn't celebrate Thanksgiving in my home because we were taught the beginnings of it, and this idea that they were teaching you in school that the Native Americans sat down with the Pilgrims at a table, and the Native Americans, they didn't call them Native Americans, they called them Indians, sat at this table. And you know, I'm sitting in class at probably about 8, like that's not what my father said.
Yes.
You know, that I heard there was smallpox and blankets. And you know, my father used to joke, and I don't want to ruin anyone's family gathering if that's what you're doing next week. But my father said, when your teacher says that they sat down and had you know, this meal together, tell her, and then the next day they killed them and took their land, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a you know, quick, but push the truth, and we're too far. We're all really too, I think, aware of the reality to continue to allow the blatant lies and whitewashed truth, right? This airbrushing of history. Right. We're all too aware of what really happened.
Right, and that it's harmful, right? If we, not you know you, like, but we as a community ourselves continue to insist in practicing and celebrating in this way, it's harmful to us, right? So you're right. We must be proactive. We must speak, you know, our truth at every opportunity we get, especially in the home. And I think, you know, one of the Facebook questions that came our way is considering all the cellular trauma that denies our greatness, how do we prepare our children to see themselves as and to take on the role of leaders?
I think one of the ways that we do it at Ifatayo is that we have to see their greatness. I can't tell you you're great if I don't really believe it, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to see their greatness. Second, we have to honor their voices. We have to give them space to speak, express, and share. And they will step into their greatness because it's there. And we're constantly clamping down and stamping it out.
That's right. But we do that, right? And this is what, you know, I hear from families is they do it out of fear. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They do it because, you know, and I'm a mom and I've had struggles, right? Where I'm just like, oh my gosh, if my son continues to be so vocal about his likes and, you know, dislikes and, you know, very opinionated, what's going to happen out there? How is he going to be treated by his teachers? How is he going to be treated by police, right? If he calls them out on something. So there's a genuine fear. And so
I'm the mother of a 23-year-old Black man.
Yeah. Right. So you understand, right? And so it's not just, you know, creating a new system, right? Because we know that our educational system is broken. A lot of our systems are broken, right? And trying to bring in like real African history, but it's also simultaneously working on all of these other systems to make sure that we can, you know, see the greatness in our children so that we can celebrate, you know, their voices, right? And not be fearful of what could happen to them when and if they do. And it's very much in line, you know, with what we talk about at Power of Two with our families, right? When we say to our families, you know, it's important for you to follow your children's lead. That means give them an opportunity to express who they are, give them an opportunity to explore, you know, their environment, give them an opportunity to tell you, to share with you, how is it that they want to engage with you? Because that builds self-esteem and confidence, right? And our parents are kind of like, we want to, but what's going to happen when they get to school? Right? It's that fear that we have to, you know, fight against all of the time.
We have to fight against it, because the fear is also one of the pieces of this repeated trauma, right? This fear that you had to tell your child, don't speak back, don't use your voice, be quiet, don't let anyone see you, you know, melt into the background.
That's right.
Don't look at so and so in the face. And so it is these same things that we're kind of, it is this trauma manifesting itself today, you know, that we hold our children so tight and so close and so hard that we're strangling them because of this fear. And we have to let it go. And I know it's easier said than done, and it's not going to happen every single time. Like I said, I'm the mother of a Black boy. I'm sorry, a Black man. He's going to be 24 in a couple of weeks. And I'm going to make mistakes, and we're going to make mistakes, but we have to, every one time we get it right, every one time we're able to lean into the joy and the love and let them shine, is one strike back against the trauma. And we are not going to get it right every single time.
That's
and
right.
That is okay.
That's right.
We're not, we forgive ourselves.
That's right. We're not looking for perfection, right? It's not perfection that we're seeking. We want to be able to celebrate our children and our community in healthy ways, right? Because that is how you break the cycle of trauma. This is how you make sure that we have a, you know, a healthy physiology, right? That gets passed down to the next generation, one that is healthy, one that can thrive, right? That is the goal. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
But traumas are not dealt with. They're just, we continue to pass them down, right?
That's right.
That's right. Is not just me saying, this is science saying that the traumas are there. And so we have to face and address and try to heal the traumas in our generation so that we don't continue to pass it or pay it forward.
Exactly. So
the conscious, deliberate, intentional effort.
Naima, I want you to share with the world, with all of our listeners right now, how are you at Ifitayo celebrating our children's greatness?
It's so many ways. One, we start with that we're a youth-led organization. We are not here to teach our children the way forward. We are learning from them, and we are guiding them, right? We are here to amplify their voices. We are here to give them a safe space where they can explore who they are, explore some of the traumas that they are dealing with, even just the angst of moving into adulthood. We work with youth and families. We started 2.5 with our toddlers. And I mean, I think everyone knows, but it's through arts and culture, through dance, and really loving, enjoying, and celebrating who we are, right? And so, you know, it is surrounding them with love and positivity, um, and 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 activities that kind of reaffirm, what's good about them. There's a task that they do, a class that they do where we tell the children to list out everything that's great about you. Like just keep writing. You have 3 minutes, right? Right. Just keep writing until everything that's great about you. I'm a good cook, whatever you like. What is great about Naima? And you would be surprised at that exercise, at how many children cannot list 3 or 4 things that's great about them. They can't take the full 3 minutes, right? They 30 seconds in, they don't have anything left to write.
That pains me to hear that.
It pains me too. And it's not just children, it's adults also, right? And so how we reaffirm their greatness, how we teach them about their greatness, is that by the end of that year, or by the time a child is coming to us by the 2nd or 3rd year, you get to the end of the 3 minutes and they need more time.
Yes, love that.
They need more time. And so I encourage people to take the exercise. Adults, do it with yourself if you like, or your partner, or not. If you don't have a partner, do it by yourself. Do it with your children. Do it next week if you're meeting gathering, on Thursday. If you're gathering on Thursday, use that as an activity. Let's all list out. And if it's easier, start with 2 minutes, because it's better to run out of time than to not actually be able to do it. So if 3 minutes sounds so long, do it for a minute or do it for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then do it again, and then look and see and think, and then do it again next year. Do it again in 3 months, right? How do we get to that space? I need about 10 minutes, and I might still have some more things to write.
Yes. It's really interesting, to hear you say that, because I now I'm going to want to do that with exercise with my kids, to see how long it takes them to do it, and to make sure that I am reassuring them on a regular basis and really celebrating all of the things that they do well. But I also think about, leaders, so Black and brown leaders like you and I, who sometimes struggle with this ourselves, right? Affirming our own greatness, right? And, something that I hear a lot, and I actually had a conversation with a leader yesterday about imposter syndrome, and what that is, and what that feels like. And she's a new ED, and so she's really concerned that she doesn't know enough, or she's not good enough. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You are brilliant, right? Yeah. And reminding her of her brilliance and her greatness and her power. And so to me, it's not only about individual work, but it's also about community work. And so I know one of the things that you all do so well at Ifitayo is this idea of village, right? So creating this beautiful support system. Can you talk about how you're not only partnering with young children, but how you're also bringing the community to celebrate their greatness as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, we've had to get really innovative during COVID and everything kind of happening via Zoom. But there is this, I guess we have a set of values that we operate from, and one of them is Ubuntu, that most people or many people may know about, that it is the collective, right? That I exist because we exist, and we exist because I exist. And it's one of the, I studied philosophy in college, and that's one of the separating parts of African philosophy and European philosophy, right? In European philosophy, you start with the I. Right? I think, therefore I am, right? But this starting point of we exist because I exist, and I can only exist because we exist, right? And so, not to say that the individual is unimportant or doesn't exist or is not valued, but that it is in each other, right? That we can find and know ourselves and find and know and understand our humanity. That looking at you and seeing myself, I can understand and embrace myself more, you more, and our shared humanity, right? And that we have a responsibility to each other. And so that is one of our principles on how we look at everything. And so in that, anyone who comes to Ifatayo becomes a part of the community. You become a part of the village. And when you are in the village, you are welcome, you are safe, you are cared for. Your child is my child. I can trust this person sitting next to me, right? When I first started bringing my son to Ifatayo years ago, he started when he was about 3. We used to, every week, 2 parents would create lunch for the whole, all the families, right? And it's building that trust that these are our children. This is our son, this is our daughter. And that we have a responsibility to each other, right? How we operate as a community. What is allowed in the community, right?
That's right.
So think
beautiful.
about how you interact with your child, right? That, you know, parents knew, like, you couldn't come to Ifatayo and be snatching up it. And it's not that someone was gonna beat you over the head with, but so put your hand on your shoulder and says, is everything okay? Right? And so it's teaching and understanding the responsibility to each other. Our children, they come to us and they stay 4+ years. We have families who now the grandchildren are there. So 3, 4 generations. I don't think we have 4 generations, but we definitely have 3 generations within a family. And so when you become a part of Ifatayo, you stay a part of Ifatayo. Our theme this year is actually a Ghanaian phrase, Odo Onye Fikwen, and I'm probably butchering it. So for any Ashanti speakers, know that I am probably mispronouncing it, but it is Odo Onye Fikwan, and it means love always finds its way home. And so Ifatayo is home. Ifatayo is the village, right? And with our love, right, of how we deal with self, how we deal with each other, we're coming back together, we're coming home. And home is always there, and that feeling of home, and
That's
home
right.
being safe, home being somewhere where no matter what has happened, you can come home. And so that's a big part of, you know, what we try to do, or what we're doing.
What you're doing. That's right. You're not trying, Naima. You're not trying. You're doing it. Let's own that you're doing it.
Really, holding up the children and letting the children lead and celebrating them. You know, when we did the census work, God, we have about a minute. We did the census work this year, and we had a campaign with the toddlers, who were 2, who we called our littlest leaders, counting, right, and tying that to the census. And we had our teenagers, our oldest students, talking about the census and why it was important, and using art and inspiration and creativity to push. And so in all of this, really, it is the children who are at the front and who have the solutions for how what this next generation is going to look like. And it's an intergenerational conversation. It's not like
Absolutely.
you know,
Yeah.
that we're here to guide them from the seniors, you know, from our council of elders, to our toddlers, whether
Right.
we are a community.
We all play a role. That is what, you know, our history tells us, is that we all play a role. And so we have come to our time, and I know that you and I
It's
can
always
talk,
too short.
can talk forever, which is wonderful. But sadly, we have to conclude. And so, Naima, I am so grateful, deeply grateful for you taking time to talk with us today and reminding us to reclaim what was taken and honor what we still have and to celebrate our children. And I know you have a call to action. So folks, hang on, because we're going to share that with you. Naima, again, thank you very much. To all of you who are watching and listening, I just want to leave you with this quote from Marcus Garvey, which says, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." So as Naima says, and as Marcus Garvey tells us, let's reclaim our roots. Stay safe and healthy, everyone. Naima, thank you.
Payment with love. And
That's right.
love is the starting point. Yeah. So thank you so much,
Thank you,
Erasma.
Naima.
I'll see you in cyberspace soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.